Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're taking a look at Halo Campaign Evolved, the recently rebranded Halo Studios revisiting of Bungie's 2001 FPS classic. I was pretty dumbstruck after realizing it's been over 20 years since my first foray into this universe. And while my relationship with the franchise has grown complicated over the decades, I was still extremely curious to see how this reimagining of one of gaming's most iconic shooters turned out. But after spending over a dozen hours with the remixed campaign and handful of brand new bonus missions, I'm left feeling extremely conflicted, a feeling I've grown all too familiar with when it comes to the Halo IP. On one hand, Halo Studios managed to release a pretty solid remake, especially considering the quality and cultural impact of the original. Gunplay feels phenomenal, levels have been updated in ways that feel thoughtful and play noticeably better, and it's undeniable that from a pure fidelity standpoint, this is the best-looking Halo game ever released. However, there are some pretty glaring issues too. The game is littered with bugs and performance issues, features some truly baffling UI decisions, and the direction and delivery of its story, cutscenes, and voice acting are all noticeably worse, turning some of its biggest strengths into near-crippling weaknesses. But despite the bumpy ride, Halo Campaign Evolved is still worth experiencing if you fit into a select criteria of gamers. However, it's not worth picking up for everyone, and despite a solid attempt to recreate its magic, Halo Combat Evolved remains the definitive way to experience the start of Master Chief's story, even 25 years later. Before getting into the review, a quick disclaimer about my approach. I assume most folks interested in Campaign Evolved fall into one of two main categories. The first are Halo vets like myself, who have played the original game dozens, if not hundreds of times, and are curious to see how this new iteration compares. The others are PlayStation owners who never had the opportunity to partake in this franchise thanks to its previous Xbox exclusivity, or younger gamers who might recognize Master Chief, but have no pre-existing attachment or knowledge of his impact on gaming. I'm sure there are others who fall somewhere in the middle too, like casual fans eyeing a potential return, or who maybe played Halo back in the day but phased out after the Bungie sell-off. The point of that spiel is to provide some context on how I approach this review, which is to say, I'm going to talk about Halo a bit like someone who's never played it, and maybe even never heard much more than its name. My hope is that at least some of you out there watching are new to the franchise and looking to try it out for the very first time, and you deserve a detailed breakdown of what you're getting into. While much of this info will be redundant for Halo vets, I still hope to provide value there too by comparing this new entry against the original, seeing how it stacks up, and whether it's worth another trip back to Installation 04. I've got plenty of thoughts on Halo's future in light of this remake, but I'll save those for another separate discussion. So if you feel inclined to stick around and debate me on that, if you enjoy this video, or just love talking about video games like I do, consider subscribing. Okay, with all that out of the way, what the heck is a Halo anyway? Halo Combat Evolved was one of the biggest, most influential FPS experiences in gaming, and played a huge role in its cultural discourse for the better part of the 2000s. Alongside the industry-defining feel of its gameplay, Halo also featured an interesting sci-fi story with standout characters like the Master Chief and Cortana, along with fun enemies to fight, an iconic visual style, and mind-bendingly exquisite music to boot. All in all, it was a pretty sublime package. Combat Evolved already had one remaster in 2011, but Campaign Evolved is a full-on remake from Halo Studios, previously known as 343 Industries, who have served as the stewards of Halo, without much success, to put it lightly, since the original developer Bungie moved on from the IP. Remakes are always a difficult beast to tackle, and I find them incredibly interesting considering the sheer volume we've seen in recent years, and even more so when it's a franchise I have strong personal attachment to like this. Halo Studios put a lot of effort in to ensure this feels like an actual remake, and not just a fresh coat of paint, despite being the first entry marked by a transition from their proprietary Slipspace engine to Unreal Engine 5. It features remade levels, new weapon inclusions, and more, while still trying to maintain the iconic look and feel from all those years ago that Halo was known and loved for. With some successes, but some notable failures too. Halo's story revolves around Spartan John 117, or the Master Chief, as he is more commonly known. This genetically enhanced and expertly trained super soldier is humanity's best defense against the Covenant, a conglomeration of alien species hell-bent on wiping out humankind, which, as of the year 2552 when these events take place, it has almost succeeded in doing. After fleeing from another battle, Master Chief, along with a smattering of human soldiers and his AI sidekick Cortana, arrive at the planet Threshold, but more importantly, stumble across a gigantic, ring-like structure nearby. There's not much time to ponder this discovery, as the Covenant immediately attack again, and the ship's Captain Keyes determines that not only is Cortana too valuable of an asset to be captured, but this mysterious ring needs a little investigating too, and crash lands their ship, the Pillar of Autumn, right on its surface. And this is where you come in, guiding Master Chief and Cortana as they battle through these alien foes, along with other new and terrifying enemies, to figure out what the hell this ring is, and how it could save or destroy humanity in their battle against the Covenant. I don't want to say much more than that, because Halo's story is so iconic and excellent, it deserves to be experienced fresh for the very first time, and those of you who have played it before already know exactly what I'm talking about. Campaign Evolved doesn't twist or change the main narrative in any major ways, and does a good job adding extra exposition to help flesh out some characters and minor plot points even more than the original. Captain Keyes in particular gets some nice additions that elevate his part of this tale even further, and clearly set up some future through lines to be continued in subsequent remakes, which, without officially announcing anything, Xbox and Microsoft have all but confirmed are eventually coming. As good as Halo's story might be, gameplay is its true secret sauce. And aside from a few glaring issues, Halo Studios has done an impressive job of recapturing that excellence, if still falling slightly short of the original's peaks. Before kicking things off, you'll choose one of 4 classic difficulty options, which now have a nice graphic outlining their effects on different gameplay elements like enemy density and aggression. I've conquered legendary runs on several Halo titles, but heroic is my go-to, and what I find to be the best balance between challenge and enjoyment. It's still no cakewalk though, and a few encounters had me throwing my hands up in frustration just like the good old days, especially some of its redesigned fights. Speaking of, one of Campaign Evolved's biggest selling points is its modernization of Halo's gameplay, or modern refinement perhaps, and there are several meaningful improvements. Sprinting doesn't destroy the experience, like some Halo purists might argue, and it's helpful for getting around in the downtime between fights or escaping bad situations you would have been stuck in before. But as you can clearly see from my footage, I still bot-walked around like the OG Master Chief most of the time. Other additions from later Halo games are also included, like hijacking vehicles and planting grenades to destroy them, which are nice for dealing with certain levels that feature a high density of ghosts, banshees, and wraiths. And while not specific to Halo, improvements like the ability to map grenade and melee actions to side mouse buttons is an awesome quality of life update that helps engagements flow more naturally and improves your combat prowess. One modern improvement I don't appreciate, however, is the game's over-reliance on HUD markers, objective notifications, and all other manner of visual clutter that felt like an entirely unforced error. I'm not usually a yellow paint hater, but the hand-holding here is absolutely ridiculous. Objective markers that pop up every 5 steps unless manually disabled, constant hints and reminders, and even invisible enemies being marked on your HUD, which completely defeats the purpose of their camouflage. Why on earth are there UI pips marking enemies on screen as I am literally mowing them down with my warthog? Or, as I mentioned before, while they are literally invisible? I'm sorry, but I don't need a permanent reminder of what mouse button fires my weapon, and even someone playing an FPS game for the very first time will have that memorized within 5 minutes. I even got an objective prompt to find a way around the broken light bridge when I was still a full hallway away, before the damn thing even came into view. At least let me see it first. Objective markers are nice, but damn dude, give me a second to try and figure things out before throwing one on screen. I eventually figured out how to turn these off, thank God, and it's under the navigation point setting for anyone else wondering. I'm all about accessibility, and even support a pretty high level of handholding in general, but the level of coddling here, even for someone like me, who can usually forgive and even defend stuff like this, was beyond parody. On a brighter note, I deeply appreciated many inclusions carried over from the original, like crazy grenade chain reactions or the Covenant speaking in English. I know not everyone is on board with that, but it's a faithful recreation for me, and these callbacks never felt shoehorned in for the sake of fan service. One of the remake's greatest strengths is its redesigned gameplay spaces and encounters, which are great on the whole, with a few minor misses, like fewer enemy waves when rescuing Marines during the second mission, although perhaps that's just my memory acting up. These new enemy placements and unit combinations are a nice touch, and definitely help spice things up, making old encounters feel fresh and more challenging too. The crown jewel of this updated design is an almost entirely rebuilt library level, which is magnitudes better than the original, and it's almost worth the price of admission just to play through this reimagining of what could be Combat Evolved's single weakest link. The new visual design, which we'll get into in a bit, but more importantly, changes to gameplay spaces and level structure, make it clear that you're playing a version of the library which surpasses its forefather in every single way. From added sequences, entirely new hallways and corridors to navigate, and even a new enemy type to fight, this was amazing, and one of several moments that got me thinking, this must have been what my childlike brain imagined the original game to look and feel like, and actually getting to play through that fantasticized version was simply unforgettable. The only letdown about the new library was a disappointing lack of difficulty. Some of my greatest Halo memories are sweating my ass off while battling tooth and nail through those dark hallways, struggling to survive each encounter and feeling like every fight left me on the brink of death with only a few final bullets to spare. But that never really happened here, which was a big miss in my book. It certainly could be different playing on Legendary, and I highly suspect that to be the case. But regardless, it's still a fantastic addition, and might be the single best piece of Halo content this studio has produced during their time as stewards of the franchise. Bottom line, all of the missions feel great, remixed or otherwise. The Silent Cartographer is still an absolute classic, and looks better than ever too. And moments like filling my Scorpion tank full of Marines with rocket launchers and blasting through the Covenant lines felt just like old times. Halo Studios' reworking of these levels is extremely well done, and they are arguably better on balance than the original itself. That accomplishment is no easy feat, and deserves plenty of credit. In similar fashion, gunplay also feels great, although I've never found that design element lacking since the 343 Halo Studios takeover, even if their implementation of other gameplay concepts has been less than stellar. While not quite as immaculate as the original, and to be fair, outdoing the look, sound, and feel of Bungie's iconic weapons is a tough task, it's about 90% of the way there. And blasting aliens in the face still feels excellent. This version of the assault rifle is very strong, and can easily snipe enemies from across the map. The newly added SMG provides a true AR feel from Combat Evolved, old reticle and all, and is what I defaulted to whenever possible. This is one slight misstep, because with the new version of the AR, Campaign Evolved's Magnum now feels almost redundant, which really sucks because of its iconic status and the missing interplay of switching between the two at different ranges. Speaking of new weapons, having options like the beam rifle, energy sword, and sentinel beam sprinkled in adds a little extra variety without taking too much away from that classic arsenal. And weapons felt well balanced overall, some outliers like the AR and sentinel beam, which is also super strong, aside. One classic interplay that does remain is cycling between plasma weapons for taking out shields, and bullets for punching through flesh and metal, a tale as old as time, and one I'm glad to see carried forward here. I do hate being able to zoom in with all different kinds of weapons though. It looks funny, and mapping enemies with a zoomed-in SMG or plasma rifle just feels wrong. My final gripe relates to plasma grenade sticks, which aside from enemies like hunters, should always be an insta-kill, and changing that is super lame. Enemies still feel faithful with their level of difficulty, behavior during combat, and iconic voice lines, aside from a few noticeable changes like the visual style of Elite's armor, which more closely matches modern designs. Without getting too far into spoiler territory, the Flood remain, to this day, some of the coolest and most disturbing enemies in all of gaming, and their implementation here is exquisite. New variations like shielded elites are present, and all of their models look great. You'll follow the same gameplay loop of fighting off infection forms, regular Flood, and carriers, plus tank forms added from Halo 3, which are absolutely deadly and easily one-shot you if they get too close. Flood with rocket launchers are deadly as ever, and still have that signature yellow-golden glow to help identify them, although it won't do you much good if you don't approach those fights very carefully. Overall, each enemy faction felt awesome, and fighting them elicits the same feelings of challenge and joy that it did 20 years ago. In addition to its enemies, vehicles have all been well implemented too. The Scorpion's cannon sounds amazing, each round resulting in a resounding boom that echoes across the battlefield. And the Warthog's tire traction is unnaturally strong, which is exactly how it should be. On the Covenant side, Banshees feel agile and responsive to fly, and the Ghost's boosting looks and sounds great, although its weapons are extremely weak for some reason, which makes the levels that rely on them a bit of a grind at times. The game's few stealth sections also feel a bit more refined, with additional leeway for pulling off multiple kills before the enemy catches on, which is nice for the few areas where it comes into play. Active camo and overshield pickups also return, which can now be held and activated later instead of immediately upon picking them up, and there are plenty of hidden lore terminals and skulls to find, including in those bonus missions. I haven't messed around with those modifiers yet, but I've seen folks online playing in third person, which actually looks cool as fuck, and pulling off difficult challenges. And while I've never been a huge skull collector, it does spark a bit of interest to go back and see what I can find. There were some notable pitfalls though, with hunter fights in particular being a noticeable downgrade. The timing of their attacks and your corresponding dodges feeling unnatural and nowhere near as intuitive as Combat Evolved, which is a real shame as these were some of the game's most iconic duels. Beyond that, enemy AI is pretty borked in general. This started in the very first bonus mission, which I played through before the main campaign, where a hunter fell off a platform and started attacking a barrier and completely ignoring me until I dropped down right behind it. This only got worse as enemies would run back and forth or spin around in circles while completely exposed. Had a weird infatuation with climbing on top of objects in the middle of firefights, or ignoring you and sliding across the floor like they were levitating above it instead of attacking. While not entirely game-breaking, it was very noticeable and quite jarring, especially when the first instance occurred within 10 minutes of booting up the game. Not the first impression Halo Studios had in mind, I'm sure. The biggest gameplay issue by far, however, are checkpoints, and their impact on the overall experience was undeniable and absolutely terrible. In short, their placement was completely nonsensical in numerous cases. I often went as long as 10 minutes without a single goddamn save point, all while battling through multiple grueling encounters. Then, almost as if entirely random, the same section I had been stuck on would magically generate a checkpoint, where before there was none to be found. And to rub salt in the wound, 3 more would pop up in quick succession right after. I'm not sure if these were bugged or what, but they made absolutely no sense and had an actual, verifiably negative impact on the flow of these levels. And Halo Studios needs to look very closely at how they are functioning, because something ain't right. Despite those issues, Campaign Evolved's gameplay is still quite good, and recaptures that classic feel surprisingly well in Unreal Engine, right down to funny physics like flying tanks and bodies ragdolling, and is a well-done recreation of Halo CE's fun, if ever so slightly inferior. I usually wait to discuss settings, performance, and bugs until the end of my reviews, but I already mentioned those AI issues and still have a few more bones to pick with Halo Studios, so we're going to take a quick detour. For starters, why must I link my Steam and Windows accounts when I've already played dozens of hours of MCC? I don't know about you, but there's nothing I love more when booting up a game for the first time than needing to Alt-Tab out, configure a separate account, then go back so I can actually start playing. Once you do get in, there's a decent range of settings to configure and good accessibility options. And the main menu UI is very clean and snappy, a far cry from that horrible in-game visual clutter. I played on mouse and keyboard, the same way I did with Combat Evolved back in the day, which felt perfectly fine, and also tested out controller for an hour or so, which felt equally great, so both inputs should feel right at home. In terms of performance, playing at 1440p on a Ryzen 7 7800X3D and NVIDIA 5080 with all settings maxed and DLSS enabled, which seemingly can't be turned off even if you wanted to, I was hitting an inconsistent 70 to 80 FPS, so I capped my frames at 60, which was a big improvement in terms of consistency. But there was noticeable stuttering and hitching from the start of the very first mission, which continued on through the other bonus levels and main campaign. These were thankfully infrequent, but still very noticeable whenever they occurred. Moving on to gameplay bugs, there were minor things like enemies getting stuck under the floor, classic Halo, or sound effects for Covenant vehicle weapons not playing properly, which were annoying but didn't detract from gameplay. What did detract from gameplay were things like Jackals one-shotting me with overcharged plasma pistols while running full health and shields. I saw at least one other video of someone suffering the same fate, and all I can say is, I would not be happy running into that on a lasso playthrough. Then, there was a weird input delay when switching, reloading, and firing weapons. This mostly came up immediately after swapping guns, but also seemingly out of nowhere, and got me killed a few times too. Not ideal. Finally, I fell victim to a GPU driver issue specific to NVIDIA 5000 series cards when playing through the penultimate level, where my game crashed to desktop so violently it borked my recording software and screensavers too. Even with a hotfix driver available that addresses this, system crashing issues are simply unacceptable, no matter the hardware in question. and this was really frustrating. Bugs and performance were unfortunately huge black marks against Campaign Evolved, which clearly needed more time in the oven to iron out these issues. And I'm frankly disappointed that Halo Studios felt comfortable putting out what is seemingly the start of an entire remastered trilogy in such a state. Okay, back to some more positive discussion. Campaign Evolved looks absolutely fantastic, and despite my mixed feelings on Unreal Engine, there's no denying Halo has never looked better. From the Pillar of Autumn to Halo itself, every texture and environment is fantastic. Character models are incredibly detailed, and even small things like warthog tire tracks in the sand or waves lapping on the beach look immaculate. Taking your first steps on a Halo surface is such an incredible moment, and this level of detail and beauty took me right back to when I first laid eyes on it, and was another recognition of how it probably looked to a younger me back then. It's so cool seeing these old familiar environments and encounters brought to life again while looking this good. Although some gameplay spaces are so incredibly dark, they actually hurt my eyeballs to look at. Master Chief himself has arguably never looked better either. You can debate art style all day, and which suit of Mjolnir armor looks the best, but from a pure fidelity standpoint, he's never looked this good. Visual effects are also incredible, like plasma discharge from destroyed vehicles, or a cool sparking effect when brutes go into a frenzy. Overshield and active camo look and sound great too, along with a cool animation when the monitor unlocks doors, or the absolutely gorgeous sight when a sentinel's shield splinters. As mentioned earlier, one thing I've always given Halo Studios credit for is their weapon design, which has looked and sounded great dating back to Halo 4. And they've carried that quality forward here, too. Whether new additions like the battle rifle, classics like the shotgun, or even Covenant armaments like the hex pattern on a fuel rod cannon or needle rounds poking up from a rifle, they all look and sound exquisite. The energy sword has always been my favorite weapon in all of Halo, and like Master Chief, this iteration looks and sounds better than ever, and feels incredible to wield too. While the shotgun doesn't feel quite as good as the original, it looks and sounds amazing, with huge booms and a massive kick like something out of Doom. If only it had that iconic weapon butt melee animation. What really stole the show, however, were the new flood visuals, both enemies and environments alike, which are simply phenomenal, and stand head and shoulders above the originals in comparison. The exact same rooms look 10 times better with these new textures and designs that really accentuate the gross, living, infected state the Flood impose, not only on their victims, but the environments they infest as well. The extra floodification of the library looks particularly amazing, with grossly awesome biomass additions. My only gripe is that destroyed Flood bodies just evaporate into thin air, with not even a puff of spores to mark their passing. Perhaps most beautiful of all are the remake's new cutscenes. But while showing off a very impressive level of production value, their actual direction was extremely questionable at times. This included puzzling choices like weird projectile travel times, long pauses between characters speaking, and some truly cringe-inducing TikTok zoomer brain scenes like Captain Keyes running over that pair of hunters in the hangar, except now it's brought to you in slow motion. Is that the biggest steal in the world? No. But it also feels completely unnecessary. Keyes is already badass enough that he doesn't need special effects to get the point across. And this scene would have been just as badass with the extra angles and animation alone. And don't get me started on the game's final cutscene, which they absolutely butchered from both a visual and lore perspective, and was infuriating to watch. They also got rid of iconic shots during certain cutscenes, and removed some of the shorter ones entirely, like Chief's first light bridge activation or ascending into the Truth and Reconciliation through its gravity lift. Again, is their removal an absolute deal breaker that ruins the experience? Nope. But the game is worse off because of it, and it's a shame people won't get to experience them, especially considering how good they would look now. Cortana's new design is fine. Not the best or worst I've seen, but maybe that's just my boomer Halo brain talking. There was some incredibly off-putting screen shake during certain gameplay sequences, particularly aboard the Pillar of Autumn, which also felt completely unnecessary, and paired with tons of other visual effects, contributed nothing positive, and those moments were worse off because of them. Finally, the different weapon and armor skins included as pre-order bonuses look cool, but what's the point with no multiplayer component? Sure, you can see your buddies using them if playing co-op, but when has anyone cared about that? Paying $70 for any game still hurts my soul, but charging an extra $20 for some skins and advanced access feels especially rough. And yes, I know I'm part of the problem, but man, imagine having sick cosmetics that were actually earnable and respected, like in, I don't know, Halo 3? Moving from a visual to an audio standpoint, the game sounds great too. That classic music is as beautiful as ever, with a soundtrack that still goes so fucking hard all these years later. Sound effects, buggy vehicles excluded, also sound great. Whether it's nasty noises coming from a flood carrier as it flops on the ground and explodes, or the ringing of weapons fire as you cut down your enemies. The one element of audio that falls flat, and boy does it fall flat hard, is voice acting, which took me completely by surprise, and was the most disappointing misstep by far. The vast majority of these new voice lines just don't hit the same as the old ones, which is baffling considering Jen Taylor and Steve Downes are both incredibly talented, and were brought back to re-record their lines specifically for this modern version. Instead, their delivery in many cases is completely off with intonation, the pacing of lines spoken back and forth between characters, and how their tones come across considering the circumstances, which just doesn't make any sense. Don't get it twisted either. I am in no way, shape, or form criticizing these incredibly talented voice actors, but I would love to know what happened behind the scenes for this final product to sound so god-awful. On a brighter note, Sergeant Johnson's new voice actor, Keston John, does an admirable job, and plays his character very well. It's hard to compare anything to the OG performance by David Scully, but as the voice that will most likely be carried through this new trilogy for the character, I was pretty impressed. It's cool and commendable that Halo Studios added new dialogue, and the writing itself was pretty solid overall. I'm just not sold on the voice acting, and hope that's something they can clean up before the next remake arrives, because these new versions pale in comparison to the originals. In addition to Halo's original campaign, the remake includes 3 brand new missions that take place before the events of Combat Evolved. This studio's track record with original content isn't the greatest, but I came away pleasantly surprised by what turned out to be a couple hours of solid content. These missions play out as Master Chief and Sergeant Johnson infiltrate an alien research vessel in the hopes of discovering the Covenant homeworld's location, so humanity can finally strike back at their mortal enemy. Once aboard, they bump into a prophet, the highest position within this alien hierarchy, known as Harmony, and his Sacristan warriors, a new sub-faction of Covenant. Their mission quickly goes off the rails as they end up attempting to destroy Harmony's genetic experiments while rescuing some captured Marines. And these levels introduce some cool new concepts. Although from the opening title crawl, I thought I was starting a Star Wars game and not Halo for a second. The banter between Chief and Johnson is fun, and there's some good dialogue about the various Covenant species, the Office of Naval Intelligence, and other callbacks for vets that also serve as introductions for newcomers to immerse them in this universe and its lore. A new character, Lieutenant Williams, is introduced as well, and as an orbital drop shock trooper, or Marine Special Forces soldier that deploys to the battlefield in drop pods, this was a cool inclusion for those familiar with the concept. However, this was likely confusing for newcomers, because they probably aren't aware of the beef between Helljumpers and Spartans, and likely have no idea why Williams addresses the Chief in such a jaded and dismissive manner. It was cool to watch their relationship play out, however brief, including some nice dialogue with emotional impact, like a short scene about destroying the enemy ship that served as a nice nod to the UNSC's mentality and heavy sacrifices in their war against the Covenant. The visual and functional design of these new levels continues that same excellence from the base game, and they are a nice switch up from those older environments, providing new sights to see and new areas to fight through. These encounters were surprisingly difficult too, even on Heroic, and I was stuck on a couple sections for a good bit before sweating my ass off and finally breaking through, which was a wake-up call, but very much appreciated as a Halo vet. I did return and replay them after finishing the campaign to see how Controller felt, and they were noticeably easier. So part of that initial difficulty was definitely me just being rusty. The battle rifle is a cool weapon addition, and also sounds fantastic. Very meaty just like the shotgun. And the needle rifle is back too, which I love. I know it's cheesy and a cheat code for defeating the brutes you'll fight, but I just can't help it. Speaking of brutes, I really enjoyed the concept of Harmony subduing them with behavioral control units that can be destroyed to make them go berserk, and that also serve as their weak points instead of headshots. They could be a bit hard to trigger at times, and even when they were seemingly supposed to attack nearby allies in this crazed state, they would often just run straight at you instead, even from all the way across the room. There's also a spaceflight mission where Chief and Johnson commandeer some Seraphs to protect an allied ship, which was a nice callback to the space defense level in Reach. The visual effects in that mission are particularly beautiful, even with a little stuttering, and flying over a partially glassed planet and through a debris field of destroyed UNSC ships was simultaneously beautiful and chilling. I wasn't expecting much, but this extra content turned out to be pretty damn good. Clearly, Halo Studios can write some kind of decent original story, even with old characters as the stars, and I wonder where the hell that's been for the last decade or so. They aren't reason enough to go out and pick up the remake on their own, but did offer some solid original content that longtime fans can appreciate and that serves as a nice added bonus for newcomers too. Okay, it's time to talk about the blood gulch-sized elephant in the room, the fact that Campaign Evolved doesn't include a multiplayer component. Listen, I get it. There's a reason it's called Campaign Evolved, and it was clear from the start that PvP wouldn't be included, so there's no controversy over cut content, misleading marketing, or anything else like that. Extra effort would have been required, probably a lot of it too, but this still feels like a huge missed opportunity considering the state of Halo Infinite's multiplayer, which, as good as it is now, just doesn't cut it. Bottom line, no multiplayer really sucks. It would have been expensive, more work and more time, but I remember the joy of jumping into Blood Gulch, Icefields, and Sidewinder after beating Halo's campaign for the very first time like it was yesterday, and how those experiences shaped my love of competitive FPS titles, and I hate that other people won't get to enjoy that same experience, especially at a time when Halo desperately needs a bigger multiplayer presence on the market. We'll see what Halo Studios is working on next, but man, this really sucks. And it does make that $50 price tag seem quite a bit steeper than it would with a broader, more comprehensive offering. 12 hours of content for that price, even with replayability, might be a tough sell, but dozens upon dozens of hours is a hell of a lot better. It took me just under 13 hours to complete the main campaign and bonus missions of Campaign Evolved while playing on heroic difficulty. A respectable outing for a linear, story-driven FPS title, which is a type of game we don't get too many of these days. As a longtime Halo fan and veteran, I have a complicated relationship with the franchise, particularly over the last decade. And while I always do my best to approach reviews objectively and fairly, that history has no doubt colored my perception of Campaign Evolved to some degree. On the other hand, when reviewing a remake, historical context is even more important than with a regular review, and even more so than usual when discussing an IP with a history as long and conflicted as Halo's. This is a solid remake that admittedly does a lot well. Its gunplay, visuals, redesigned missions, and new bonus content are all genuinely quite good. But there are plenty of issues too. The game's performance, voice acting direction and delivery, questionable changes to cutscenes, and a glaring lack of multiplayer all weigh down this experience, and are not insignificant criticisms. For PS5 owners, this is the best and only way to experience Halo on your console. And in that context, this is a perfectly acceptable product and solid entry point for someone who's never played the original, including for what is hopefully a new generation being introduced to it for the very first time. For vets like me who have already played it numerous times, it's worth a run just to see the new content, updated visuals, and level design changes, but it's a hell of a lot better value if you're playing on Game Pass. For $50 US, this is a solid recommendation for PS5 players and Game Pass subscribers, although I'd approach it with a healthy level of caution regardless, and maybe wait for a patch or two to squash some of those bugs before jumping in. For anyone else on Xbox, or more likely PC, who hasn't played Halo before, the Master Chief Collection provides way better value, and Halo Combat Evolved is still the definitive way to experience this story, whether for the first time or going back to relive it again. And ultimately, my time with Campaign Evolved just made me want to boot up the original game instead. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more gaming content, and let me know your thoughts on Halo Campaign Evolved in the comments below. Has Halo Studios done enough to convince you to give their take on Combat Evolved a try? Or does the original still reign supreme like it does for me, even all these years later? Either way, thank you for watching. You're a real one and I appreciate you, and hope to see you in the next one. Catch you later!